Let's go to Gerald Celente, who's standing by now. Hi, Gerald. Nice to have you with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Gary.
Gerald is one of today's pioneers in trend strategy. He founded the TrendsResearchInstitute in Kingston, New York, and is the publisher of the TrendsJournal. Gerald is a person who is not clairvoyant. He is not a futuristic alchemist. He is simply a pragmatist. He looks at the available evidence. He separates out what is reasonable from not reason, and he comes up with projections. His projections have been so remarkably accurate that for over 25 years he's been able to give us, those of us who care, an idea of what is about to happen. Gerald, a few things. 5 years ago on this program, you and I had a discussion. We said, what role is China? And people didn't believe China had any role. I said, is it not true that China could be the leading power within economic power within 5 years? You said yes. I said, isn't it going to be the moment they're the economic power that China and the BRIC nations will no longer have the dollar as a reserve and go to their own mixed currencies, which means you're going to have a hyperinflation in the United States. The value of what we own is going to go down. The cost of buying is going to go up. And you said yes. Didn't we both talk about that we have paid no attention to the environment? We weren't going to pay attention to the environment. Most people would live in denial of the environment until it was too late to do anything about the environment. Well, look at what happened. Gee whiz, yes and yes again. So on those, you said and I said that we believe that the dollar should be stable because of no place else to put the euro, and the euro was in effect being supported by the dollar and vice versa. But if you allowed gold and silver to go their rightful value, gold would be right now around $3,000 and silver would be around $50 to $60. That has been artificially held down, and there's new evidence of that. That'll change. So that's just a few of the things you and I have discussed of what was going to happen that have happened. Now, here's my questions for now. Give us your idea, in summaries, please, of what you see happening in the United States first that would be of interest to this audience, but we're a worldwide audience, and then take us around the world showing us what you believe are going to be the likely outcomes in the near future in the issues that you find you've been studying.
Well, most people are concerned with the economy, and when we saw this harsh winter that we had, we're up here in Dutchess County, Ulster County, the electricity rates went up over 38%, 40%, and people are barely making ends meet. And all of this stimulus has only enriched the rich. And of course, in listening to you, these aren't conspiracy theories; they're facts. Everybody saw who reads. For example, a handful of hedge fund operators, among them 20 or so, made about $25 billion last year in profit just for themselves, take-home pay. So the gap between the rich and the poor is going to continue to increase. We're at a very critical point now at the equity markets. We're looking at a NASDAQ bubble very similar to the one that happened in 2000. And we're seeing it with these companies like Twitter and others. Anybody that goes to Facebook, Twitter, nobody looks at the advertisements, so they're really not making that kind of money that they say they are. So we're looking at a possible bubble. The real problems, I believe, are going to start coming from that so-called millennial generation. And these are the people that are in debt by going to college. I mean, they're talking about, you're 40 years old before you pay off your college debt. So that's going to hurt the housing market very much because about 40% of new homes are from people under about 32 years old. They're not buying. Then again, we go back to the only reason we have this equity market bubble that we see now is because the record low interest rates, and the record low interest rates means that mergers and acquisitions, hedge funds, all of these players are just gambling more money. You're seeing now, Gary, mergers and acquisitions, leverage buyouts, and speculation that is 3 trillion times over the amount that it was before the bubble crashed. That's the United States. Geopolitical. China. We were just talking about it. The United States is trying to challenge China with their pivot to Asia. And now China just put a drilling rig over there, a off the shores of Vietnam, but by the way, very far off the shores. And these are disputed territories, but we heard Hillary Clinton say when she was Secretary of State that the United States is going to stand by Vietnam if there's a dispute between China and Vietnam over the Spratly Islands and other islands, the Parcel Islands. And then we just saw President Obama come back from Japan saying that the United States is going to defend Japan in their contest and conquest between China and Japan over the islands in dispute as well. And by the way, people should really read the facts about this, because all of the data shows and all of the facts show that China indeed does have rights to these islands, and they were stolen from them by Japan's colonial conquests back at the end of the 19th century. So that's how it looks. And again, my belief is that when all else fails, they take you to war, and they keep beating the war drums. And now, of course, we're moving into Africa because of what's going on in Nigeria. And you have the TrendsJournal. We did the four corners of the world where we were showing conflicts, and then all of the conflicts. The corners that we picked out were Nigeria, Africa, of course, Thailand, Venezuela, and Ukraine. What's going on, and people, about these children, these young girls that are being massacred or stolen by this psychotic group out there, they're using that as an excuse for a so-called humanitarian mission, when the bigger picture is the AFRICOM divisions that the United States is moving into Africa in order to challenge China over the natural resources. And they're using this excuse just as they did. You remember that humanitarian mission in Libya, same kind of thing. So what's really behind what's going on in Nigeria, it's 174 million people. It's one of the richest countries in natural resources. They're making a ton of dough, and the corruption is at all-time levels. So you have record-high poverty rates. So what this really is about, yes, there are the lunatic fringes within these groups, but it's a separation of North and South, Muslim in the North, Christian in the South, and Christians having the resources and poverty spread throughout the region. So you're going to start seeing more and more excuses for a build-up of military, and it's already going on. We just heard the Secretary of Defense, Chuck Yeagle, in Chicago earlier this week, warning Americans against, quote, the risk of isolationism.
Let's take a look at what I'm seeing. I just came from Camden, New Jersey, where I spent a day, and it was a sad day in the sense that I saw those people who cared very much about their community, and there was one street where every house had barbed wire or metal grills and gates. In effect, they tried to protect themselves. When I asked the people why, and they said, well, because the drug traffic is so bad, crime is so high, poverty is so wretched here, that if we do not do this, they'll come right into your house, and they'll take whatever you have. If you resist, you'll be hurt or killed. So we have to, and yet we have no place we can afford to go. And I interviewed gang members. I interviewed people. One man I interviewed actually said that he moved to Camden, this older man, because he had a lot of diseases. He was out of money. He was broke. And he couldn't afford his meds for pain. So he was told, he had lived in Philadelphia, right across the river from Camden. So he lived now in this little tiny one room in Camden because he could go out in the street and buy drugs, street drugs. And I said, but that's, A, it's dangerous for your body. And he said, yeah, and it's also dangerous to be here. He said, I was mugged 3 times last week alone on this street. So that's Camden. And I drove up and down 100 streets, stopping everywhere. Now, if you brought back jobs, if you opened up factories, if you promoted small businesses, if you promoted food co-ops, if you promoted community gardens, if you promoted treatment centers and crisis centers with a holistic nature, you could de-ghettoize the city. You could get it back on its feet. You could help the people. And indeed, one priest did exactly that. And yet no one uses that as the example of what could be done in a neighborhood. So take a look around America now. Camden's the worst, but right behind it is Detroit. And then you've got 500 other towns. What do you see happening to the ghettoization of America and American suburbs now?
Well, if it continues to go on the trend line that it is, everything's going to get worse. I mentioned what happened with Chuck Hagel in Chicago earlier this week. I want to read you this quote. Let us remember that the biggest beneficiaries of American leadership and engagement in the world are the American people, and that this current era of unprecedented prosperity cannot be taken for granted and had evolved partly due to America's diplomacy and military strength, Hagel said. You know, like yourself...
He's a good Democrat. He's a perfect Democrat.
Perfect Democrat.
Perfect.
And you talked about the jobs going, and people don't know that, you know, they have no point of reference, the younger people, that Camden, New Jersey, like Trenton and Detroit and so many other cities, these were thriving cities in America before they sold out our manufacturing base. So now you have Bill Clinton. He's making the rounds, too, setting it up for Hillary and saying how great his economic policies were for America. And he's the one that sold us out probably more than anyone with NAFTA. Oh, the guy that brought us GMOs. And I heard you talking about Monsanto owning Blackwater.
Yes.
And this is the guy, Bill Clinton. You love those bovine growth hormones? Bill Clinton. So the Democrats are the perfect cover for the multinationals. And you're seeing the same thing going on with Obama. But like yourself, I try to do things to change the course. And I believe, as I see it, there's only going to be one thing, the biggest thing that I can see bringing America back, and it's a restoration. And I've started a new movement. It's called OccupyPeace.us. It's only for the United States. And it's based on 3 words: no foreign entanglements. Rebuild America. This is the time, I believe, and by the way, the polls are with me and those of us that don't want foreign entanglements, because the people can see the disasters of them and how it's robbing us of our future. And it goes, again, you've been up here, I'm in colonial Kingston. Every one of the founding fathers, beginning with Washington's farewell address, no foreign entanglements. And I have to hear some guy like Hagel or a guy from Princeton, Harvard, or Yale, bullets, bombs, and banks telling, could you imagine them going to Washington or Adams or Jefferson or Franklin and saying, you know, you guys are full of baloney. Don't you know who I am and my father was? You're wrong. We have to go into other countries. So what I'm saying to you, Gary, the questions that you're asking me, the obvious conclusions are that if we stay on the same trend line and support the same systems that we have, it's going to be much worse than it is now. America is falling into third world status. That is not hyperbole. It's fact. The gap between the rich and the poor, as you know, is the widest in the United States of any of the industrialized nations. You look at our along with health, we don't even win place or show anymore. The nation's turning in. You know, when poor people were poor, remember in the old days they were thin, they were hungry, and now the poor people are the most obese. Wonder why? Couldn't be the foods, couldn't be the system. And now we're coming up to the midterm elections, and the media is going to take a big play in it. Oh, who are you going to vote for, the Bloods or the Crips? And I don't say that sarcastically. I say that as a fact.
Gerald?
Because both political parties are murderers, thieves, and just like the Bloods and the Crips.
They're sociopaths. Gerald, real quick, because we're out of time, do you know any signer of the Declaration of Independence who today would not be on an enemy watch list, a kill list, or a sedition list?
You got it. And, of course, the Supreme Court just passed that ruling that allows the National Defense Authorization Act to take people like you or me claiming that we have terrorist ties, and they'll never hear from us again.